Mooney's going to have free run wherever he goes. He's going to have the worst corner guarding him, and he's going to have just tons of space. I think there's a lot of upside here for Darnell Mooney.
Guess who was recruiting him? Kirky Cousins, because Kirky, playing for the Vikings, saw Darnell Mooney twice a year over these last 3 years, and he knows that he is very underrated. His bowlerism is not recognized, but it could finally be recognized here in this unbelievably great situation here.
Yeah, you look at over the past few years, he's had a lot of big gains in his career. Last year, a 41-yarder, he had a 56-yarder the year before that. Kid can run, so don't forget about Darnell Mooney. Wipe away all that thought in your head of him in a Bears uniform, because it's a whole different ballgame now with him in Atlanta.
He can't throw himself the ball. He cannot throw himself the ball. He's tried, I believe, but just can't do it.
What?
Why are you shaking your head?
You're welcome.
Wide receivers you can get after pick 75 in your draft that are going to be difference makers. Now, John has made a living. Trust me, folks, this is how I became a fan of the Guru. He has made a living and a killing identifying players this late in your draft who are going to be impactful for fantasy football, and nothing's different here in 2024. So, John, we got a fun little list here of guys who, you talk about Christian Watson at wide receiver 45. This guy's a 6th, 7th round pick. Last year played in just 9 games thanks to his nagging hamstring injury. So this offseason, he's working with specialists to strengthen his legs. They have, I guess, evened out what they said is a difference in mass between both legs. I'm no doctor. Sounds kind of crazy to me. But on the field, John, to me, he's the most talented wide receiver that Green Bay has. He can command the football. If you look at weeks 12 and 13 last season, he caught a combined 12 balls for $165 and 3 scores. The talent's undeniable. The issue here is the hamstring. That's what's keeping him off the field. So that's why we're getting this massive discount on a kid who just 2 years ago was the 2nd pick of round 2. So, Guru, what strikes you about Watson as someone we want to target this summer?
Well, his ADP is around 100 right now in season long. I know it's a little higher, maybe 20 spots higher in best ball, which makes sense for a guy like Watson, who had a couple of blow-up games, 100-yard games under Aaron Rodgers early in the career. He actually led all rookie receivers that year in rushing. I actually talked with him about that at the Combine in terms of like the Deboization of the NFL. And I thought it was kind of coming out of left field a little bit, but he was like, oh yeah, I'm all about that. And he did just that with that. He also led second among the rookies that year in yards per reception. I went and I looked into some other numbers here, and we'll get into other elements. But, I mean, the dude's got a 17% touchdown rate, so that's a pretty damn good number. So 17% of the time he catches a ball, it's for a score in the National Football League. I don't have it in front of me. I think it's 12 tutties in the career thus far early on, despite missing, 10 games last year. Also even just the 10% rate on targets. It's like throw him a ball 10% of the time, he pulls it in for a touchdown in this career thus far. It's pretty damn good. I think, and people who are following this podcast, listening all year long know, I'm in on Jordan Love. I'm big on that. And you're right about what you say. Like, he does command the ball here because there is some sameness here. It reminds me a little bit of Nico Collins last year in Houston because, before Nico fully blew up last year, you're looking at the depth chart. You're like, oh, wow, there's a lot of interchangeability here. So it stood to reason that Nico would stand out because he was like, okay, there's your perimeter receiver right there. You know what I mean? And that really is what Watson is as well. And, great downfield threat. He could be more deadly than Nico. Talent is just absolutely bursting from Christian Watson. Good kid from all accounts. From our guy, Gary Melton. My interactions were good. Again, the hamstrings are kind of everything. Apparently his muscles were growing out of symmetry. Whatever that is, I could tell you that, my right calf, I tore the muscle racing a 15-year-old on Halloween wearing a Flash costume. I do have a serious imbalance, and even my wife to this day comments on it. When I wear shorts. Anyways, he's been working on that, and if that what ends up being the real problem, and now we're kind of good health wise. I mean, it's just a great investment. Eighth round, ninth round, if you're lucky. I'm sure it'll probably tick down to the seventh round, maybe even the damn sixth round if he blows up a little bit in the preseason. But it's good offense. They've got great continuity there. I know it's a crowded receiving core. That's really one of the big elements that's holding his price down. But I'm all in here, buying, trying to hit that knockout shot. Basically, that's Christian Watson this year.
I just drafted him in the Scott Fish Bowl because he's one of those players. If you hit on him, John, he's a guy who could become, maybe you draft him as your wide receiver 4, wide receiver 3, whatever it is. He could become your wide receiver 2 really quickly. And then now you're cooking with gas because everybody that you drafted ahead of him just kind of gets slotted down a little bit. And that's how you win your league. Another guy who could help you win your league is Jameson Williams. So in best ball, he's like 78 overall. In redraft, he goes a little farther down. Why? Because all these guys in your home league that you're going to be drafting, drinking Busch Lights in someone's garage Labor Day weekend, they look at him and they go, the kid's never healthy. Here's what you got to know. Right. He might be the second most electric wide receiver with the ball in his hands behind Tyreek Hill. That said, we need him to be on the field every week so we can feel good about him when we slide him into our lineups. Last year, played in just 12 regular season games and amassed 42 targets. But what gets our juices flowing here, what we saw in that NFC title game, John, he scored on a 42-yard rush, also caught a receiving touchdown. His best ball ADP's got him behind guys like Rome Odunze and Keon Coleman. So what makes you think that Williams can break through this year as a wide receiver 3 option for our season-long teams?
Well, it's certainly big boy pants time here. Time to put those on here in year number 3. I've been joking around on Sirius XM for a couple of years. It's like, what is he, a mascot? You actually going to play some football here or what? I mean, we knew we were coming off the ACL a couple of years ago, but last year I thought was a little weird. But, you mentioned all those good points there. He also showed well as a blocker at times. And look, the vibes are pretty good in the offseason. Dan Campbell talked about him being one of their most improved players. He says he's a man on a mission. I know we're in man on a mission time of the year, but Dan Campbell seems to be in. They did let Josh Reynolds go. You look at the receiving core here. And by the way, both these two guys we've hit on so far both have good quarterbacks. That's always somewhat underlooked element here, like who's throwing them the rock. But, this Lions receiving core is really setting up for Williams to have a massive role. Khalif Raymond is a journeyman third receiver. DPJ is kind of buried on the depth chart. They don't really have anyone else. So Jameson Williams should be, he'll be the third option in the passing game, which isn't bad for the Lions. They're going to, run it a lot as well. But Jared Goff is a professional quarterback who'll get him the ball. They'll take the shots. Certainly Goff does that. And by the way, they only have 3 games outdoors all year. Now, granted, a couple of them come late in the year in Chicago and San Francisco, but my man's going to be indoor on a track more often than not this year. So it's that magical year 3 blow up or glow up, whatever you want to call it. But I'm buying at these prices again, same as Watson, 7th, 8th, maybe the 9th round. Pretty much buying in on Jameson. It's a good example of, by the way, why you don't need to go totally crazy on wide receiver and get like 4 with your first 5 picks. These are 2 stud players here who are not really going off the board that high in season long so far.
Yeah, and look at the draft capital that the teams put in to Williams and Watson. They want them on the field. They want them to start in, especially 2 wide sets. And Williams should never come off the field in 2024 for Detroit. You just mentioned some of those guys, they just going up against Khalif Raymond, Donovan Peoples-Jones, a couple dudes who I've never even heard of, Antoine Green. Give me a break. So again,
Raymond
folks,
Khalif.
You want to
don't forget about Raymond Khalif.
Yeah. Raymond Khalif, you get a little drunk, you have one too many Stellas this weekend, and then all of a sudden you're like, whoa, hey, Raymond Khalif, and he's starting to flex for me this week. So another name that might throw some folks in your home league that maybe they haven't heard before, Khalil Shakir. I love that you put this pick on our podcast, pre-show rundown here. So Khalil Shakir is stepping into a starting role on an offense that's wide open, folks, in Buffalo. There's like 300 targets that are vacated with Stephon Diggs and Gabe Davis out of town. So in is Keon Coleman, he's a rookie, and journeyman Curtis Samuels. Shakir shined in the postseason. He caught 10 of his 12 targets and scored twice. Last year, per FantasyPoints data, he ran 78% of his routes from the slot. So, John, we got to see how this all shakes out because you got Dalton Kincaid. He's going to be patrolling the middle of the field. Curtis Samuel, per that same data, ran slot 68% of the time. And we got Keon Coleman, who did a lot of really good work in the slot at Florida State, but he's probably going to be primarily their ex-receiver. I think there's massive breakout ability here in the 9th or 10th round. That's easy money for a weekly PPR flex in Khalil Shakir.
Yeah, he is the only receiver currently on the Bills roster who has caught a pass from Josh Allen in a game in the National Football League. So that's impressive. 2 touchdowns in both playoff games, 10 grabs for 75. I was very, very impressed by how he had an 87% catch rate coupled with a 15.6 yard per reception number. Very efficient, 34th out of 120 wide receivers last year per FantasyPoints data to run at least 25 with at least 25 targets, 34th out of 120 in efficiency. Curtis Samuel, he did have a good year under Joe Brady in 2020. Joe Brady, when he was with the Panthers, he had caught 77 balls. He had 41 rushing attempts for 200 yards, a couple touchdowns. So you understand why Brady probably had some influence there. But Brady is also talking up Khalil Shakir as being like super intelligent, which we kind of figured that out. I mean, the guy nothing has been too big for Khalil Shakir. I mean, he has literally shown well in the NFL every single opportunity he's gotten. I mean, he's a savvy route runner already. So now he's, another year older and wiser. And boy, just like in the playoffs, Josh Allen is going to lean on him because he's going to need him. And how about this? With Brady as the OC last year, here's the numbers for Shakir and Diggs, Stephon Diggs. Shakir, 36 targets, Diggs 75 targets. Shakir, 438 yards, Diggs 388. And Shakir had 30 grabs, Diggs 44. Shakir scored twice, Diggs once. So, I mean, I think we're looking at Shakir, ideal fit or not, as their main outside receiver to open up the season here for Josh Allen. And obviously that's been a pretty fruitful place to be. That's where Diggs and Gabe Davis have lived. So, I mean, I know they have all these guys you mentioned. They also have 17 other journeyman types, Mac Hollins or Hack Hollins, Chase Cesspool or Claypool. I mean, we could gurufy all these. Marquez Valdez Skankling. I mean, KJ Hamler as well, Andy Isabella. I mean, it's ridiculous, the turnover
Good
here
Lord.
and all these names.
I love the Shakir call. Even late in the draft, like we mentioned Curtis Samuel, I'm fine taking a shot on him. If I'm in a deep league, 14, 16 teams, I remember his last year when he was with the Panthers under Joe Brady a few years back, he had over 1,000 yards receiving and 7 scores. He was a top 25 wide receiver. So I think Curtis Samuel and Shakir can both be viable in some deeper leagues. All right, we're rolling along here. It's the Fantasy Points podcast. Brian Drake, the guru, John Hansen, talking about some wide receivers you can get 75 picks or later in your season-long draft who could pay dividends for you in 2024. Guru, someone has to be the top target earner for the LA Chargers. Joshua Palmer could be that someone as a best ball ADP of wide receiver 54. Now, there's this narrative that no one's going to complete a pass. They're just not going to throw the football for the Chargers. But we know that's not the case, okay? So Palmer's got this great opportunity to be a productive playmaker. And when he has been given that role, he's gone and done well. Go back to 2 seasons ago. He gave us 9 or more PPR points in 10 games. Now he's locked in as a starter. We're going to get Josh Palmer. You're going to get Ladd McConkey. Someone's going to catch the football here, John. And why not Josh Palmer?
We'll see what Quentin Johnston can do here. I wouldn't hold my breath in terms of expecting great results with Greg Roman there. Not exactly known for, scheming wide receivers open well with sophisticated route trees and the like. It's going to be, pretty basic out there, but Palmer's going to get the volume, and he probably should emerge and will emerge as as an outside receiver way more than we're used to, because I think McConkey is going to be locked into the slot. That's what Ladd, of course, told me he wants to be outside, but breaking in as a rookie, I think it's for the better for him. So that makes Josh Palmer, for my money, obviously the number one outside receiver for the Chargers. And, he's clicked well with Justin Herbert in the past. He's got a couple of 100-yard games where he's stacked up. If you've heard me on Sirius XM over the years, I've been on him from the beginning. I've been a Josh Palmer guy. Never said he was a stud, but in the right situation, he's done some real nice things here for the Chargers and Herbert in the right situation. And this looks like it's pretty solid, despite the fact that they're going to be run heavy. The target share is what is looking really good for Palmer, with a good quarterback as well. And Herbert all in here, 12th round pick all day long. That's like the beautiful fifth receiver where, oh crap, my number two receiver is tore his ACL. You're like, not a problem. I got Palmer's catching 5 balls every week.
Mm-hmm. And especially if he finds the end zone a little bit, on his career, he's never been a huge touchdown guy. He only has 9 in his 3-year career, but that should go up in a full-time role this year. So I like where you're going with that one. All right, Jahan Dotson. The bloom's a little off the rose here with Dotson, who ran hot in 2022 with 7 scores. Last season, he only turned 83 targets into 49 catches for 518 yards and 4 scores. But we're excited about Jaden Daniels at quarterback, and this new fast-paced offense. It should allow for a lot more opportunities in DC. So here's another former first-round pick who's essentially free in drafts this summer. So what's the upside for our boy Jahan Dotson?
Probably not through the roof, but if you're looking for a really strong ROI and a good buy low, I would in fact submit Jahan Dotson. I liked him a lot coming out of Penn State. Really liked him. I actually said I thought he was more talented than Terry McLaurin. Still up for debate, but no debate about McLaurin being more productive and just a hell of a football player. And Dotson did certainly take a step back last year. Look, there was a perfect shitstorm, if I could be honest here, because new coordinator Eric Bieniemy, I feel like there was something going on there that wasn't good and wasn't conducive to production. Well, he's no longer there. You mentioned Cliff Kingsbury in the scheme, by the way. I mean, they should scheme him open, afford him some touches in that regard. So it's kind of a big year, certainly. And then you look at that target share and what they did and didn't do in the draft. I think it's screaming they need Jahan Dotson here. No question about it. I'm surprised that Luke McCaffrey is already considered like a front runner. I think he's a little bit of a project here. I mean, he only played receiver a couple of years in college. So they do have De'Ami Brown. But, I think Dotson is primed. And by the way, Jaden Daniels, liking what he's seeing. He is a superior athlete, Dotson. So it's a bet on talent, bet on pedigree thing. And it certainly doesn't help that his cost is down to the level that it is. Like in a season-long draft, barring a shocking, awesome preseason with Daniels, I mean, Jahan Dotson's a guy you'll get him in the 12th round. And that's a good buy no matter what, because okay, you could discard it. You won't regret, you won't remember it. Didn't crush your season, but it's betting on a damn good player who could make your season.
Yeah. So often in fantasy, we see players going to the waiver wire, John, and they're like, okay, I got to get somebody for a bye week. I got to get some depth on my team. And you're picking up like these 3rd, 4th receivers on their NFL team, where we're talking about guys today who are second options on their NFL team. Like these are guys who are going to be on the field. They're going to play all the time. You're never going to really see many plays where Jahan Dotson's taken off the field. He's going to start in 2 wide sets. If they go to 11, which they'll probably play a ton of, he's going to be out there. So I'm with it.
Yeah.
And another guy who's going
to good list, man. It's a good list. I mean, these guys are going to pop. I'm feeling it.
If this next guy doesn't pop, then, I don't know. We should retire from fantasy football. This guy's coming
Nah.
from one of the worst situations in fantasy to what could potentially be one of the best. And we're talking about Darnell Mooney, wide receiver for the Atlanta Falcons. Only 26 years old, spent his first 4 years in Chicago. Now, you go back a few years, he had a 1,000-yard season, had 140 targets, was looking like, hey, this guy might be something here. The past few years, listen, we can kind of throw it out the window. The offense is terrible. The quarterbacking was garbage. Now he goes and he's going to be essentially the wide receiver 2 on the outside, on the other side from Drake London in Atlanta. London's going to get a ton of double coverage. People are keying on Bijan. You got Pitts running around the middle of the field. Always has to have a little safety with an eye on him. Mooney's going to have free run wherever he goes. He's going to have the worst corner guarding him, and he's going to have just tons of space. I think there's a lot of upside here for Darnell Mooney.
Totally. Per the Chicago Tribune, Mooney was apparently offered a contract, 3 years, $30 million. He declined. They said he bet on himself. And then when the season ended, they're like, oh, well, he lost. Nope, he won because the Falcons paid him $9 million more than that. And guess who was recruiting him? Kirky Cousins, because Kirky, playing for the Vikings, saw Darnell Mooney twice a year over these last 3 years, and he knows that he is very underrated. His bowlerism is not recognized, but it could finally be recognized here in this unbelievably great situation here. I am seeing something similar to Jordan Addison last year. You had Hawkinson eating over the middle, and you had Jefferson, Spider-Man out there all over the place. But when they took the shot plays, often it was to Addison downfield, often in single coverage. That's Darnell Mooney this year. So he's a great separator. He's a separatist, and Kirky can get him the ball.
Yeah, and you look at over the past few years, he's had a lot of big gains in his career. Last year, a 41-yarder. He had a 56-yarder the year before that. Kid can run, so don't forget about Darnell Mooney. Wipe away all that thought in your head of him in a Bears uniform, because it's a whole different ball game now with him in Atlanta.
He can't throw himself the ball. He cannot throw himself the ball. He's tried, I believe, but just can't do it.
Same could be said for the next receiver we're going to talk about, Michael Wilson, second-year man down in Arizona. Now, he's forgotten about because we're all talking up Marvin Harrison Jr. and Trey McBride, but to me, Wilson provides deep league upside. And trust me, I had him on some deep leagues teams last year, because once Kyler Murray returned, they looked like an actual NFL attack. Final 2 weeks of the season, he caught 10 of his 12 targets for 150 yards and 2 scores. So even with awful quarterback play most of the season, he turned in 7 weeks with 8 or more PPR points. So again, guys in deeper leagues, this is an asset. This is somebody who's on the come up, and you want to get your hands on him. So what makes you think Wilson is going to take that next step this year, John?
Don't know if he's going to stay healthy. That's been a problem dating back to his years at Stanford, but no doubt about it. I thought this time last year he was one of my top deep sleepers. I did videos on him on our feed if you want to check it out and see what I said at the time, because he did show that ballerism. He actually finished first on the team in yards per reception last year. I watched him practice for a week in Mobile the year before, and he looks like an NFL starting receiver. Very much so, especially in the red zone. He runs very good routes, good, strong hands. I mean, he's not a burner per se, but he's, again, a pro receiver. Now, he is expected to be the Z receiver with Marvin Harrison at X, which I think is a good spot because, you're off the ball, a little less pressure. When you're out there on an island, often in the perimeter, you're working against the sideline, basically. So a guy like Michael Wilson, you're going to have more options to get the football. You got Trey McBride, who's going to be obviously probably the top target, followed by Harrison. But Wilson is, again, third, clear third. Shout out to Greg Dortch, but I think Wilson will certainly be the clear third option. And Zay Jones, by the way, is going to, I guess, battle Greg Dortch, or maybe presumed starter going into camp. But I just think Kyler Murray, solid quarterback, offense, year 2 under the regime, pretty good vibes. They've done well with the offensive line. They've added depth in the backfield. It's a pretty good roster. I mean, they've done a hell of a job, Monty Ossenfort and company, reassembling this Cardinal offense.
When you're sitting in your draft room looking at players to take shots on, look at the play caller, look at the quarterback. If you've got check marks in both of those boxes, pull the trigger and get that guy on your roster.
Yeah.
So,
and by the way, he's one of these guys. There's a couple of them. The next guy we're going to talk, we're calling them night and day guys. And, some of it is probably cliche, but there is some truth to it in that Michael Wilson, for example, asked during the OTAs, how does he compare this time around year 2 to year 1? Oh, night and day. You know what I mean? Like my head's swimming out there. Now the game's slowed down. One of my favorite phrases of all time is if you think you stink, which applied to me more than anyone in the history of athletics. But that's neither here nor there. And unfortunately, I thought way too much. But yeah, I mean, he's feeling it here a little bit in year number 2. We'll see if the vibes continue in training camp, but he's absolutely talented enough to where it's like every week defenses are going to be like, all right, we got to stop McBride and Marvin Harrison, and then Mike Wilson eats.
Yeah, we live in this, instant gratification society, John, where if something doesn't happen, the first week of the season, we're like, nope, Michael Wilson stinks. And you're old like me, so you remember this. The old fantasy magazines that you used to write, every magazine had a third-year breakout receiver article because it used to take receivers 3 years to really come out of their shell. Now we're like, oh, if they're not out as a rookie, then forget about these guys. So, sometimes it just takes a minute for people to catch up to the NFL game and to figure out what they're doing. Maybe the same could be said for the next guy we're talking about, Marvin Mims. So he's got a lot to prove, and there's a fluid situation around him. He's got a new quarterback with the arrival of Bo Nix. Out of here is Jerry Jeudy. Who knows? Cortland Sutton could be next to follow him out the door. So this offense should look a little different in year 2 of Sean Payton. Mims, though, is a forgotten man in drafts. So every time we get into a draft, people are like, Marvin Mims, he stinks. He only caught 22 balls last year. What's different this year with Marvin Mims than last year, and what should make us pull the trigger on him in our fantasy drafts?
Well, he's another night and day guy in terms of comparing, where he was at in year 1 in Sean Payton's offense to where he's at right now. We also had the departure of Jerry Jeudy, so that certainly helps. And Sean Payton kind of talking him up a little bit in the OTAs. I like the quote from Payton. He referred to him as having transitional speed, which, that's kind of like a Tyreek Hill thing. You know what I mean? Like change direction without losing so much speed or momentum and not having to throttle down, things like that. So I think that's, kind of what Marv Mims brings to the table. And I think he's their deep threat. He's going to start barring a meltdown in training camp. And he's certainly their deep threat. We all remember what he did. His first 3 catches in the, 3 of his first 9 catches, went for 60, 38, and 48 yards. I mean, that does beg the question, why didn't they throw it to him more? Maybe part of the answer is Russ Wilson stunk. So maybe that was a little bit of a problem. But presumably year 2, it's slowing down for Marv Mims. He's got game-breaking speed, good return man. It'll be Cortland Sutton at X there. Mims probably open inside, or him and Josh Reynolds are a little, versatile back and forth there. And we'll see about Tim Patrick, but I think it's pretty clear. It would be an upset to me if we go into the season with Mims as only the third option in the passing game. I'm fully projecting him to be basically the second guy, with Josh Reynolds probably right behind him.
And you never know. You might get a little more value out of him with these new kick return rules. Because if the Broncos have him back there returning their kickoffs with the new shorter structure, maybe he breaks a few. Yeah. I don't know. You Scott Fishbowl guys out there, I know they're drafting him left and right. All right, one more name here of receivers that you might find 75 picks or later into a draft. Another guy who was a first-round pick, Rashod Bateman. Make or break time for Bateman here. He won't have to compete with OBJ for targets, should be fully healthy, which he wasn't last year. So, John, this is an offense we know doesn't want to throw the ball a ton, but they're investing in their receiver position. Bateman a few years back, Zay Flowers a year ago. So there are weapons on the outside for Lamar. Can Bateman take the next step this year? Because I'm on record. If you ever listen to the SiriusXM show when I'm hosting, I'm not a Zay Flowers guy. I think Bateman with a bigger frame could become maybe that second option behind Mark Andrews in this offense. What do you think about Bateman this year?
Yeah, well, I mean, things are looking like, on two things. One, like it's now or never, all that in terms of his career with the Ravens. And two, it's lining up like he'll actually come through here. I mean, all the reviews from guys like Mark Andrews and even Wiggins, the top draft pick, the corner, said he was the toughest cover in the OTAs. Makes some sense. I wasn't actually a big Bateman guy coming out. He not really gurific, you know what I mean? Like good, but just, you know, doesn't, move the needle that it needs volume basically. But you're not getting that most likely, and with Lamar Jackson as your quarterback, and you're certainly not getting it if you're hurt. And he's had all those injuries and all that. So, it's one of those ROI situations though, because again, and it's another bet on talent, pedigree, all that. I mean, not that his pedigree and not that his talent is through the roof, but the pedigree is pretty damn good as a former first round pick. So didn't pick up the 5th-year option, right? So this is it for Rashod Bateman. And yeah, Monken at the very least, the passing game was better than it was under Greg Roman. I actually was a Zay Flowers guy last year. I mean, you could argue I was right in terms of his fantasy impact for year one. I liked him as a pick that last year, but I liked him in general. I was a little underwhelmed not doing as much downfield. So that's a storyline that I'll be following this year. But Bateman, if you recall back, I do watch every game. Bateman was getting a lot of downfield looks late in the year. Granted, a lot of them didn't connect, but yeah, he's got a real shot here. And then Aguilar, what are we doing? I mean, he's just such an annoying tease, but he's also a year older, and it's Bateman's time to shine here. And we'll see about Zay Flowers, what he does.
Yeah, I mean, Zay Flowers last year, you look at his average depth of target, and it was basically a glorified handoff every time Zay Flowers got the ball. I mean, but if you watch him at Boston College, they were taking shots to him left and right. So who knows? Maybe if Bateman stays on the field, we take some shots on the field to him.
I thought he had AB in him downfield, honestly, Zay Flowers. Not yet in the NFL.
Yeah, Flowers he was a guy I had on several teams, and he just frustrated me so much because it took him, like you needed, to steal a phrase from you, planetary alignment for him to score. So he was almost like one of these grinder running backs who would just catch like 6 balls for 48 yards. And you're like, if they don't score, they're not coming through. And for a while, that was Zay Flowers, and he just drove me bananas. So interested to see.
I don't think the career of Zay Flowers has been defined yet, though. So I mean, it's a big year for him. Like, not that he sucked last year. I mean, geez, didn't they throw him like 11 balls in his first game, something like that? Like that was a little surprising. I might be exaggerating a little bit. Now I'm going to look it up, but I think he showed enough to me, at least, to where 10. He caught 9 of them for 78. He showed enough to me last year to where I'm certainly not giving up. It is a big year, but I also, by that, same token, I wouldn't be shocked if he did, in fact, improve and started making some downfield plays, and then he might be something close to the player I thought he was.
I know he is not on the list here, but Zay Flowers, another guy who we'll see where he goes in drafts come.
Well, he's going a little too high. That's why he's not on the list. I mean, I'm not even listing him as one of my targets this year, man, because ADP around like 50. It's not cheap.
No, I think that's why I'm out on him, but that's a conversation for another day. So